Everyone's got their panties in a knot about net neutrality, but very few people actually understand what it is, and there's no shortage of false information circulating by everyone. Well, in this video, we're going to clear up the most prevalent net neutrality related misconceptions and expose some of the lies that you've been told. So first I'll start off with a little anecdote. I live in Toronto, and in 2008, the cheapest data plan for mobile where I lived was quite expensive. I do not remember the exact price, but I think it was around $30 for 10 megabytes. And then if you go over, it was like really excessive data charges. In fact, I was working in tech support at the time at Rogers, who is the largest provider in Canada, and I would hear horror stories of customers calling in telling me that they were dinged with $30,000 phone bills because they were trying to send faxes through their cell phone data plan. So that's pretty scary, but it wasn't terribly uncommon for that to happen. Now, I quit my job in 2009 so that I could go off to university, but I remember that sometime, I would say, maybe beginning of 2009, my ISP released a new data plan that was only $15 a month for unlimited email. The way that this plan worked is that it would block browsing behind a paywall and allow you to have truly unlimited email. Now, this was a classic example of a violation of net neutrality. If that happened today, people would flip out. But you know what? It wasn't all that bad. In fact, it was awesome. I didn't need browsing. I didn't need streaming video. All I needed was email for school. And prices didn't go up. They actually went down for me. I was paying less with this plan than I would have had to pay had my ISP been honoring net neutrality. I'm sure the ISP loved the plan as well. Scheduling emails is much easier to do than scheduling streaming video. Like if I get my email 10 seconds late, it's not a big deal. But if I'm getting 10-second interruptions in the middle of streaming videos, I might cancel my subscription for that. And this is because the most fundamental premise for net neutrality is wrong. Not all data is equal. How can anyone disagree with that? To make the claim that all data is equal and should be treated equally is to make the claim that someone performing remote surgery should be treated with the same precedence as someone who's torrenting illegal copyrighted porn. I mean, hell, even as a consumer, imagine if your ISP told you, let's say that you were a gamer and your ISP told you that they will give you precedence as a gamer so that you can have a real-time experience playing a game, and in order to accomplish this, they're going to throttle torrents. Who in their right mind would say that's a bad thing? Hell, I download torrents, but I wouldn't give the torrents the same priority as real-time gaming. But you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many misconceptions about net neutrality, and I have no idea where the hell they're all coming from. But the weirdest one that I've encountered by far is that abolishing net neutrality will allow ISPs to block specific parts of a website. So I'll give you an example. There's a claim floating around that ISPs will block certain YouTube channels if the channel doesn't pay them some money, or like if the channel is criticizing their brand or something. Or maybe you'll be surfing on Reddit and then certain subreddits will be blocked behind a paywall, or certain images will be blocked behind a paywall. It's like a poorly written episode of Black Mirror. None of this makes any sense. First of all, there's something called the law of diminishing marginal returns. The internet is big and expensive and it is growing exponentially. And you're telling me that an ISP is going to pay people to sit down and sift through petabytes of data and choose certain websites or specific images to put behind a paywall? And apparently this is supposed to be profitable? Yeah, what planet do you live on? Hey, well, maybe abolishing net neutrality is great because it'll create a lot of jobs. No, that's completely ridiculous on so many levels. They're not going to be able to do that. But believe me, this claim is even stupider than that, okay? I have a background in computer engineering, and I can tell you that from an engineering perspective, this claim is completely ludicrous. Like, let's say you're on a website like YouTube or Reddit, right? They use HTTPS. The ISP knows what website you're on, but they don't know what web page you're on. They don't know what YouTube video you're watching. They don't know what channels you're subscribed to. I've actually seen people saying that, well, the ISP is just going to crack the HTTPS and then inject their own paywalls in place of your YouTube video or something. That's ridiculous. Not only is that illegal, I mean, you're like tampering with data, not to mention invading people's privacy. Even if ISPs did do this and somehow get away with it, all YouTube would have to do is change their site up a little bit, change the way that the URLs work, obfuscate their APIs a little bit. And so what, all the ISPs are just going to spend millions and millions of dollars entrepreneurs to just continuously reverse engineer all the different websites that they want to inject paywalls into. Buddy, you are insane if you think that's happening. But you know what? YouTube wouldn't need to handle this in a technical way, because if this ever happened, Google would just sue the ISP for massive damages. And all of this is pointless anyway. Large corporations already have a lot of influence over YouTube through advertising. Or this is why so many channels are getting demonetized. This has nothing to do with net neutrality. So that's obviously the most ridiculous claim that I've seen regarding the whole net neutrality thing. But some of these other claims are almost as bizarre. Everyone says that, well, if they take away net neutrality enforcement, the ISPs will start price gouging their consumers. If it is true that ISPs want to price gouge their customers, then what is stopping them from price gouging their customers today? Because net neutrality enforcement has absolutely nothing to do with price setting. ISPs can already raise their prices. Why don't they? We've already covered this in a previous video. It's because prices are set by the laws of supply and demand, and if ISPs raise their prices, they end up making less money because they lose customers. And I already know what the response to this is. Well, no, the internet is a necessity of life nowadays, and ISPs could raise their prices as much as they want. Okay, so why don't they then? Like, if you were running an ISP and you know you could double your prices and double your profits tonight, wouldn't you just double your prices? Why wouldn't you? Seriously, what is stopping ISPs from raising their prices? And while you're connecting the dots here, make sure you somehow incorporate net neutrality in your answer. But first, let me just grab some popcorn. I've seen people saying that ISPs would block the websites of their competitors. This one is actually feasible, but it never happens. I mean, net neutrality was only in force since 2015 and really only in the United States. And yet cases of meddling like this are few and far between. I think there's two reasons for this. First of all, it would be illegal to do this because of antitrust laws that have nothing to do with net neutrality. And like, to be honest, that's the main reason. But I guess it's not just that. I mean, if an ISP really was blocking their competitors' websites and they had competitors, I think there would be a public uproar. You would have mass boycotts. And guess what? Registering a new website is cheap, so competitors would be able to get around this anyway. This would just be an utterly stupid thing to do. Not to mention completely illegal for reasons that have nothing to do with net neutrality. But there are instances of stuff like this happening. Classic example, AT&T blocking Google Wallet in order to promote ISIS. But these cases are rare. AT&T cannot be in every industry at once. So the amount of industries that actually get affected in practice are going to be minimal. In fact, the existing regulation didn't stop the Google Wallet case from happening. In fact, it caused it to happen. Just think about the amount of regulatory burden required to build a payment app. That's prohibitive to entrepreneurs who want to operate in that space. In fact, I knew some entrepreneurs who were building a payment app, and it was almost impossible for them to enter the industry. But imagine if AT&T decided to shut down Google in order to promote their own video sharing website. There's just no way that would fly with consumers. But now look at this.
And telecom companies will say they would never slow down a website speed in order to get more money out of them. But let me tell you a little story. Recently, Comcast was negotiating with Netflix. This graph shows Netflix download speeds on various providers. That black line plummeting downwards was their speed on Comcast during the negotiation. See if you can guess when Netflix agreed to Comcast demands. I'll give you a hint. It's right there.
This is the first pro-net neutrality video by John Oliver on HBO's Last Week Tonight, and it appears to be a gross misrepresentation of facts. Netflix may have made a deal with Comcast and other providers around here, but let's talk about what happened here. But first, I need to give you a crash course in how the internet works. What people might not realize is that Netflix already pays vendors in order to stream content to their customers. These vendors are called Content Delivery Networks, or CDNs. These CDNs are not free to use. So around this time, Netflix started routing traffic through their own custom CDN, OpenConnect. This was when Netflix's performance started to seriously suffer. It's typical for CDNs to pay an amount of money known as a settlement when transiting traffic between networks. And Netflix was doing everything they could to avoid having to pay those fees. Netflix was routing their traffic along paths that they must have known were not capable of handling these massive loads that they were throwing at them in order to save money on routing. But then they proceeded to blame Comcast and Verizon in their blogs and through in-app notifications. When called out about it by Verizon, who demanded that they back their claims, Netflix removed the notifications and wrote another blog that claimed that the in-app notifications were just tests. There's an excellent write-up on all of this that goes into a lot more detail, and I'll post a link to that in the video description. Oh, and read the comments. It's a total shit show. No one can talk about this issue with any amount of rationality. And here's another one that I found. The media was apparently blaming wireless providers for throttling Netflix, and it turned out that it was just Netflix throttling itself. It's obviously under different circumstances, but this is related. Another humorous one that I saw was someone was saying that it's possible that embedded videos or images could be blocked by ISPs who just don't want to deal with the bandwidth. The first time I heard this, I laughed out loud. Okay, what does an ISP sell? They sell bandwidth. The whole point is to use more bandwidth. If they are not using bandwidth, then that means they are wasting productive value. When I was working in the telecom industry, I was told that ISPs do not like to sell BlackBerries because BlackBerry at the time was very efficient at allocating bandwidth. So ISPs preferred to push the iPhone, which was extremely wasteful. The way that they looked at it, it was like a pipe. And if the pipe is not full, then they're wasting value. And this last point is related to another very common talking point that I keep seeing get brought up about data caps, as if abolishing net neutrality is going to somehow result in more data caps by ISPs. Newsflash, data caps have nothing to do with net neutrality, and ISPs can already set data caps. And another thing that's related to that is the idea that somehow abolishing net neutrality enforcement is going to make the internet less free or open. Now, interestingly, I've seen this exact wording being used all over the place. You guys do know that the internet is not free, right? Regardless of whether or not ISPs are blocking certain websites behind a paywall, you still need to pay them to access the internet in general. And if they want to, they can charge you whatever they want. I think that the fact that people think that the internet is free just because they aren't encountering constant paywalls is somewhat unfortunate. Nothing is free. You are always going to have to pay an ISP in order to use the internet. So it doesn't matter how they charge you, but they are still charging you. ISPs are still a business. They still have to make financial investments and build the infrastructure and deliver it and offer support to their customers. So if the internet was free, then where does the financial capital required to build it come from? Is the suggestion that the government should be responsible for building the internet? I'll get to that in a minute. The irony of this mentality, though, is that net neutrality enforcement actually causes the internet to become less open. It is a giant, complex regulatory maze that prevents startups from competing against existing companies. Okay, consider this. In entrepreneurship, there is a concept called judo strategy. What judo strategy allows entrepreneurs to do is compete against larger companies with very little upfront investment. And the way that they do this is by using the size of their incumbents against them. And one of the ways that you can do this is by breaking off a small market segment of your competitor and servicing that segment. And then the idea is that the value of the lost customers is less than it would cost the incumbent to price you out of the market. I know that's a little abstract, but let me give you a more concrete example. Suppose that a big ISP was ripping people off in some city and you are an entrepreneur and you want to compete against them, and maybe you have a couple $1 million that you're willing to invest to compete against this multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Well, you would have a really hard time taking them on head on, and that's why you employ judo strategy. So let's say that you identified that 2% of this ISP's customers within the region that you were willing to serve only use emails and nothing else. So they weren't on streaming video sites, they weren't doing online shopping, online gaming. The only thing they did was check their emails, and that's it. And you identify that they're getting ripped off because they're getting charged the same price as if they were streaming because they're being sold these overpriced bundled packages. So then, because of the technical requirements for servicing email, you could service these customers for 10 times cheaper than the big ISP. So you'd have to invest a little bit of your own money, you'd have to pitch the idea in front of some venture capitalists, and you raise the money, you build the tower or the infrastructure or whatever is required, and then you service these customers and you steal these 2% of customers from the big ISP. Now the ISP has two options. One is that they can lower all of their prices down to what your prices are and price you out of the market. But now think about this. You are threatening to take 2% of their market, and they would have to lower their prices by 90% for 100% of their market. so they would end up losing more money if they tried to price you out of the market. And then the other option is that they would have to adjust their data plans in order to compete with you. But because you're so small and they are so big, it would be very hard for them to do that. They would have to build a regional website for the specific region that you're targeting. They would have to have special training and support staff for that specific plan. They would have to get the engineers to build it on their end, and it would just be a little regional plan for them. And so there's a lot of diminishing returns involved here. And that is not a sustainable way to conduct business. And even if they did that, because you are so small, you could just pivot your business model and target a completely different market segment. So that's the gist of how Judo strategy works. But when you add net neutrality into the mix, well, now you can't do that because that would be against net neutrality. So that keeps out competition. And guess what? This type of stuff happens all the time. I was reading an article a little while ago on a company called Phoenix Broadband, and I was reading that they were getting dinged non-stop with frivolous FCC compliance lawsuits by their competitors. And because they were a startup at the time, they didn't really have the means to defend themselves in court. And I think it got so bad that they ended up just selling their ISP to a larger competitor. Whatever happened to Google Fiber? Google's not even a startup. They're this giant company, and they came to compete against companies that are way smaller than them. Like back when Google Fiber was expanding, I thought that they would just overtake the whole market and wipe out all the competitors. That never happened, right? And Google has come out saying that they're being held back by regulation. And you know, all of this is pointless. Not only is net neutrality a pointless goal whose fundamental premise is wrong, but it's silly to think that net neutrality wouldn't exist at all, or at least in some form, if it were not being enforced by government. My assumption would be that if net neutrality is really this great thing, that the free market will bring it. ISPs will provide net neutrality if that is a service that customers are willing to pay for. Would it be more expensive than getting a plan that doesn't honor net neutrality? Of course it would be, because it costs the ISPs more. The people who use the least demanding services would be subsidizing the people who use the most demanding services. But hey, if that's really what people want, then I'm sure that ISPs would offer that as a service. I don't see why they wouldn't. And I think that a lot of people who even agree with that point, that net neutrality may exist at a markup in a free market that doesn't enforce net neutrality, that many of these people would be disgusted that it's something that they have to pay extra for. But the solution for that, again, is not to get government to enforce net neutrality. That isn't going to automatically get you the lower prices on internet. The only thing net neutrality enforcement by government does is it forces all consumers to buy the marked up internet plans. Okay, but maybe you're in the group of people who doesn't believe in the free market, because apparently a very large percentage of Americans cannot choose their ISP. I've seen different numbers for this. I've seen some websites reporting that 50 million Americans cannot choose their ISP. I've seen another website that says 100 million Americans cannot choose their ISP, that there's only one option for them to buy, so there's no competition within their region. Now look, I don't know how accurate these numbers are, and I think a lot of these websites that are measuring these statistics will deliberately be engaged in shenanigans like measuring it in terms of the affected land area instead of the actual number of Americans affected by monopolies. Now the problem with doing that, of course, is that some pieces of land are more dense than others. So I think the actual statistic is that 30% of census blocks are affected by monopolies, not 30% of Americans. But then you see so many websites talking about how it's 30% of Americans that are affected by monopolies. I mean, this is a deliberate misrepresentation of the data. But it's even more sketchy than that, because I think the data actually excludes service providers that don't meet certain criteria. So again, this is just a way of manipulating the numbers, and then we can all pretend it's science.
Today, 2/3 of Americans live in areas with just one choice for high-speed internet.
Here's Vox manipulating their viewers into believing a lie. I mean, what qualifies as high-speed internet? They probably mean 25 megabits per second, but my point is that it's deliberately misleading. The obvious intent is to make the claim that there are absolutely no other options for people. Look, none of this is surprising. The government does stuff like this all the time. So then what's the real percentage of people who are truly affected by monopolies and don't have any competition or any other options in their region? Who knows? It could be 1%. Look, 80% of people in the United States live in urban areas. Now, go to any major populated city and tell me that there is an ISP monopoly there. There's no way. I don't believe it. But obviously, when you're trying to push your agenda upon other people, it's convenient to have a bunch of phony numbers on your side. So I don't believe that there is an ISP monopoly. I think that's all rubbish. But let's pretend that there is a monopoly. I've heard cases where ISPs have, well, essentially bribed politicians to have monopolies in certain municipalities. And you know what? I'm sure that happens all the time too. So I actually have a better idea than regulating the ISPs. Why don't we just regulate the municipalities? Why don't we prevent politicians from accepting bribes from lobbyists and giving special handouts to corporations? I still don't understand how it's legal for some of these exclusive contracts to even exist. This is the definition of crony capitalism. Why are we okay with this? Let's solve the problem at its source. Let's stop the politicians from creating these exclusive deals. Now, that being said, I want to reiterate that I don't think that net neutrality is even something that's desirable. But if your primary excuse for enforcing net neutrality is because the free market doesn't exist with ISPs, then let's solve that problem. Let's deregulate so that we can allow the free market to work. And like I said, all of these regulations are anti-competitive. They are a regulatory burden or a maze of regulation for entrepreneurs to navigate in order to compete with larger competitors. Large companies aren't affected by the regulatory burden as much. They can pay millions of dollars to hire lawyers to navigate the maze of regulation. It's the little guy who's affected by the regulations. You know, to be honest, I get the impression that a lot of people who are pushing net neutrality really have a hidden agenda. I think the agenda is that people want the government to control and to run the internet, and for that to be a service that's provided for free. I mean, after all, if the government is running the roads, and the roads are a utility, a public utility, and people are allowed using the roads for free, then maybe if the government was running the internet, that the internet would be free as well. It's hard to even know where to start with this, okay? Well, first of all, if the internet was classified as a public utility, and even if it was free, who's to say that there would be net neutrality? You know, whether or not the internet is classified as a public utility, that makes no difference to the logic of whether or not net neutrality is a sound idea, right? Because other utilities violate the concept of neutrality as well, right? Consider like the highway. You will have express lanes, you will have lanes that are passing lanes, lanes that require 2 or 3 passengers. There's lanes that are exclusive to large trucks or buses. Like, shouldn't all lanes be considered equal, right? Like, net neutrality does not follow from the internet being classified as a utility. It has nothing to do with whether or not the internet is a utility. But like, why would you want to classify the internet as a public utility anyway? It's stupid. If the free market is providing internet just fine. There's nothing wrong with the internet that the free market is providing. And there is competition. It is possible for people to lay down new cable lines or to put down fiber optic cables or to build satellites. It is expensive to do, but it's not prohibitive. Like, there are companies who have the money and the capital to do it. The idea of the internet falling into the hands of government terrifies me. The government is not going to honor your privacy. In fact, even in the pseudo-free market system that we have today, the government already doesn't honor your privacy. Now, who in their right mind would want to give the government more control over the internet? I'm sorry, but that's such an absurd idea. And if you think that Comcast is a shitty provider, wait until you see what the US government would do with the internet. If you actually think that they're going to make the internet better or cheaper, you are out of your mind. Like where I live, we have skyrocketing electricity prices. Tons of old people keep their houses cold during the winter because they can't afford to pay their power bills. But of course, if you state your opposition to this, then you must be a paid shill. Some ISP is paying you to voice that opinion. And that includes me. I guess I'm a paid shill. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to vocally say this. If any ISP wants to pay me for having this opinion, I will gladly accept that money and I will voice my opinion loud and clear, even more than I already am. In fact, I'll post a link to my Patreon down in the comments, and if you happen to be an ISP and you want to pledge a donation to me, go ahead and do it. Okay, this is hilarious, alright? I've been called a shill so many times for being against net neutrality. Dude, right now I have 41 YouTube subscribers, alright? And everything I do is an open book. My Reddit account is jsideris, and that's my main YouTube account. I mean, that's my brand, jsideris. My website is jsideris.com. All right, it's not like I'm running a bunch of Reddit accounts going around talking about net neutrality all day. I have 3 other YouTube accounts, and amongst them all, I have a total of 1,000 subscribers. I have never talked about net neutrality on any of my other YouTube channels. So I guess those ISPs are really getting some good bang for their buck by paying me to have my opinion. It's hilarious, but you know, this whole shill thing is just a way of shutting down the discussion. It's like saying, well, because this logical reasoning is sponsored by a corporation, the logical reasoning is invalid. And therefore, it's a way of shutting down the discussion without actually addressing the points that are being talked about. All right, even if someone is paid to tell you a fact, that doesn't make the fact invalid. And this whole logic is a double-edged sword. Like, the people who work at CNN are paid to tell you that net neutrality is a good thing. John Oliver is paid to tell you that we need net neutrality. So if someone was paid to say the opposite, why is that all of a sudden a bad thing? Every inch of this logic is just riddled with fallacies. I'll get right down to my final thoughts on this issue, and I want to talk a little bit about the incentives of some of the media who are really pushing the idea of net neutrality, as well as the incentives of the ISPs who want to abolish net neutrality. I think that the media gets a lot of value out of stirring up shit and trying to create panic out of something that isn't really a big issue. And I think that one of the ways that these large media corporations are able to do that is they're able to leverage the socialist bias in their audience to invoke a sense of alarmism when it comes to anything related to reducing the role of government in regulating corporations. This is an easy way for these alarmist media corporations to get viewers, to increase their audience, to reach more people. And it's very clear to me that they have a financial motive to make sure that people are afraid of something. And so they fabricate these boogeymen like Ajit Pai, so that their viewers, as these irrational tribal creatures, will feel like there is a threat that they need to address. And that by banding together to fight this common enemy, you are on the moral high ground. You are a good person and you are doing the right thing. It costs you very little, but you can feel a sense of accomplishment, even a sense of belonging, just by saying that this issue is important to you. And of course, by finding all the people who disagree and telling them that they're wrong, and that they're stupid, and that they're a paid shill.
For once in your life, we need you to channel that anger, that badly spelled bile that you normally reserve for unforgivable attacks on actresses you seem to think have put on weight. We need you to get out there and for once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moments, my lovely trolls. Turn on caps lock and fly, my pretties.
You might be wondering about what the true incentives are of the ISPs. I know I spent a lot of time thinking about this. It's pretty interesting because from an economics perspective, a lot of these regulations will keep out competitors. But there are a few obvious incentives here. Here, just take a look at this video.
Until 2005, internet service providers were classified as common carriers, which meant the FCC could regulate them like phone companies. In the internet's early days, these regulations kept phone companies from charging customers extra for using dial-up services like AOL. And when phone companies started offering DSL broadband service over their lines, common carrier rules forced them to let their competitors use those lines too, which meant consumers had tons of choices when it came to picking an internet service provider.
Oh man, I hate Vox so much. They're just so shameless with their lies. The first thing is, well, yes, these laws would have prevented ISPs from charging people extra for using dial-up services. That's really one-sided because it also prevents companies from offering lower prices. And another thing is that, just like any other price regulation, these price controls create scarcity. So like, what is incentivizing corporations from investing in building a better internet infrastructure if they can't make money off of it? But more importantly than that, imagine if you were an early internet provider and if you started building broadband connections, all of your competitors could use those connections. So then what is the incentive to laying down a new broadband line? Really, it gives you one of two options. One is that you can either make an exclusivity agreement with a municipality, or you can just wait for one of your competitors to lay down a line and then you get to use it. And then Vox has the audacity to say that this is going to increase competition? No. I also think that ISPs are afraid of the future. I think in a few years, satellite internet will be the norm. It will be much more common than it is today. Like right now, satellite internet is cost prohibitive. But in a few years, we could start seeing some major competitors to broadband or even fiber utilizing massive fleets of satellites in low Earth orbit constellations. And I think that when this happens, the ISPs realize that they are going to be in deep trouble because they are not going to be able to adapt because of the regulations. So in an ironic way, the same regulations that are preventing startups from competing with these large ISPs will actually prevent the large ISPs from competing against potential new startups that will utilize the new technology, the new platform. And then if that happened, I suppose that the only way that these large ISPs would be to launch their own satellite constellations, which not only would be costly, it would be a waste of the existing infrastructure that's already in place. And then the final incentive of these ISPs is fairness to their customers.
Internet content providers like Facebook, Google, and Netflix, they love net neutrality because it means that even if some of their products, like streaming this video for example, take up a lot more bandwidth than others like email, internet service providers can't charge them extra for getting all that data to our phones and computers.
It's ironic that this is a pro-net neutrality video because what Vox is saying here is that when you pay your internet bill with net neutrality, you are handing out a huge subsidy to Google, Netflix, and Facebook. So by abolishing net neutrality, the ISP can say, hey Netflix, if you want to use all this data, then you pay for it and pass the costs onto your own customers so we can lower our prices. Like everyone keeps saying that this is a way for the service providers to make more money. No, they already are making that money. This is a way for the ISPs to price discriminate, meaning that some customers will end up paying less money. Why? It's so that they can be competitive and they can give customers the services that they need at a price they are willing to pay for. At the end of the day, these regulations are not about controlling the large ISP monopolies. Ultimately, they are all about controlling and constricting your options as a consumer. Thanks for watching. Please consider sharing this video with other people and subscribe for more JS Economics.